Okay, good morning. My name's Professor David Choquenot. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research here at the University of Canberra, and I'm sitting in for Stephen Parker this morning. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
That's great. Now, the focus of the week really has been on the Prime Minister's overseas trip. He met with the US President Obama overnight. How did the meeting go, do you think?
From the reports, it seems to have gone well. They discussed an enhancement of the American commitment to troops and other military activities rotating through Darwin, and the President talked up Australia as a defence partner. Of course, the Americans would be pretty happy that the new government has committed to restoring defence spending and has isolated it from the cuts. It took quite severe cuts under Labor. Climate change was discussed, but it seems that there was an agreement to disagree, as it were, that energy is going to be on the agenda for the G20, and I would imagine in the months before that leaders' meeting in Brisbane, there'll be a good deal of international argy-bargy about precisely the form of that discussion at the G20. But obviously both leaders wanted this first leadership meeting to be successful, and the fact that security and defence was top of the agenda helped make it so. Of course, the whole thing has been rather overshadowed by the developments in Iraq and the pressure on the United States to provide some assistance in relation to those.
Overall, do you think the trip's been successful?
I think basically it has, because there was a lot of publicity before the Obama meeting about their differences on climate change. In a way, that's been something of a diversion in the publicity generally, the coverage generally about the trip, and it has highlighted, I think, the fact that Australia is out of kilter with much of the thinking on climate change, the international thinking. But on the whole, Tony Abbott had a successful visit to Indonesia. He was, of course, completely on song in Canada with the Prime Minister there, and the Obama encounter seems to have gone smoothly. So I think he'd be reasonably happy with the trip.
Meanwhile, back here at home, the budget row is continuing as fiercely as ever. Joe Hockey's come out fighting on issues of fairness. Joe's been arguing that the proposed health and education cuts are fair, and that rather than focusing on these, taxpayers should complain that the excessively costly welfare system is unfair on them. Do you think ordinary Australian punters are likely to be convinced by that logic?
I don't. I think they've already decided that this is not a fair budget, and not a very logical budget too, incidentally, but I think that Joe Hockey has lost the fairness argument, and the fact that he did feel the need to come out with this speech, which was in a way very defensive, even though he was trying to go on the front foot, shows that the government is aware that this has been a real problem. And turning around the whole budget debate now does look an enormous task, and one that I can't see the government having much success with.
On that theme, the coalition backbench has been talking up concerns about the Prime Minister's paid parental leave scheme. Would any of them, do you think, actually cross the floor and vote against the scheme when the time comes?
If changes aren't made, I think that is possible. Certainly John Williams, the New South Wales National, who's been out and about giving interviews this week, I think would take that action. He's been in the mould of Barnaby Joyce of old, when Barnaby was in the Senate and crossed the floor. I've forgotten how many times, but a hell of a lot. But obviously the government will be working on the crossbenchers. It couldn't afford to lose too many in the Senate, and it is a big thing to cross the floor on a measure that's a signature policy of the Prime Minister. So while there might be one or two or three, I can't see a whole lot of them doing that, even though there are deep worries about this scheme among the backbenchers. But the big thing also is whether the Greens are willing to support the scheme, and clearly they've been having some second thoughts, and from their point of view it's quite a big decision because it's in line with what they think should be done, but nevertheless they are very wary, I think, these days of supporting anything that's brought forward by the Abbott government.
Clive Palmer seems quite positive now about the repeal of the carbon tax, and he suggested that he'd be inclined to pass the legislation without too much fuss. All he says he wants is a legislative guarantee that the savings would be passed on to consumers. Do you think there'll be a quick deal on that aspect of the budget and when the new Senate meets in July?
I would assume so. Of course, it's very dangerous to assume anything where Clive Palmer's involved, but certainly the government is starting this new Senate much earlier than is normally the case with a Senate turnover, and it's very anxious to get this legislation through quickly. And I think also Clive Palmer's own credibility would be a bit dented actually if he didn't pass the repeal legislation. It's something that he's supported in the past, and so there might be a little bit of argy-bargy, but I think there'll be a pretty rapid resolution.
Staying with Clive, he's also said that he won't pass the mining tax repeal unless the government stops its plans to cut welfare to the children of soldiers that have been killed and seriously wounded in active service. That won't really be a problem, will it?
Well, you wouldn't think so. Not much money is involved, and it's a very small issue. Why this is being cut is that the mining tax revenue was financing that measure, and so when the mining tax goes, the government argues that associated measures should go. But it's such a small thing that the government surely wouldn't want to lose a big symbolic policy for the sake of a very small amount of money. So I think we'll see a deal on that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, that's all we've got time for this morning. Michelle, thank you so much for your time, and Stephen Parker will be back in this seat next week.